In international business news, European markets were flat on Wednesday as investors assessed Eurozone economic data and awaited the U.S. Federal Reserve's latest meeting minutes. The Pan-European Stocks 600 index was little changed in early trade, with mining stocks adding 1%, while utilities fell 0.7%. The European Blue Chip Index closed Tuesday's session up 0.8%, its highest level in 3 months, while markets in Asia Pacific advanced on Wednesday, tracking overnight gains in Wall Street. Global markets have taken some hearts from recent lower-than-expected consumer and wholesale inflation prints in the United States, prompting bets that the Fed would have to slow its aggressive interest rate hikes. Asian markets rose Wednesday, but traders flitted between hopes for a halt in sharp U.S. interest rate hikes and concern that a surge in China's COVID cases will see officials impose more painful lockdowns. Wall Street enjoyed a timely rally thanks to healthier retail earnings and ahead of the holiday shopping season that starts this week, amid signs U.S. consumers, the economy's key driver, remain resilient to higher borrowing costs and inflation. A string of data in recent weeks suggests the U.S. Federal Reserve's long-running monetary tightening campaign is beginning to bite as parts of the economy slow, giving heart to investors who see that as giving officials room to tone down their hawkishness. While several policymakers have reiterated the need to keep lifting rates to beat price rises, they appear to be more open to a softer approach, following 4 straight 75 basis point increases. China's economy will likely grow more than 5% next year should COVID disruptions end and the government roll out more policies to boost confidence and consumption. According to a member and an advisor of the Monetary Policy Committee for the People's Bank of China, Wang Yaming, the gross domestic product growth estimate is the latest forecast from economists as the government tries to help economic activity recover from this year's slowdown. Yiming, who cited recent policies to address both COVID controls and the property downturn as favorable factors, said a more proactive target is needed to guide expectations and prioritize getting growth back on track. Public borrowing in the UK jumped in October as the government started subsidizing energy bills, and soaring inflation, which drove up interest payments. The Office for National Statistics said that borrowing, which is the difference between government spending and tax income, was £13.5 billion last month. The figure was £4.4 billion higher than last year and was the 4th highest figure for October on record. Still, the figure was below the £21 billion predicted by analysts. The jump in borrowing, which takes total public sector net borrowing to £84.4 billion in the 7 months from April to October, was largely driven by the government's energy support schemes for households and businesses, which came online last month. And finally, the U.S. Supreme Court has cleared the way for former President Donald Trump's tax returns to be handed over to Democrats in Congress. The new ruling was a major setback for the former president and comes days after he announced a 3rd run for the White House in 2024. In his previous campaigns, Trump had defied convention for presidential candidates by declining to make his tax returns public. He has been fighting for years to keep his returns private, accusing Democrats of a politically motivated fishing expedition. You're watching Business Edge. When we come back, we're in Nigeria, where the Monetary Policy Committee of the Central Bank of Nigeria has decided once again to raise the benchmark interest rate. And what does this translate to for the economy? The conversation after this. Negotiations between South Africa's public sector unions and the government are deadlocked. Now, the government is resolved to unilaterally implement a 3% pay hike, which hasn't satisfied the unions. On Tuesday, thousands of government workers took part in a nationwide demonstration on a demand of 10% increase in their salaries. Unions rejected the 7.5% offer from the government, saying that they will not negotiate anything less than a 7.6% increase in the inflation rate. The government has offered unions a package wage increase of 7.5% for the upcoming fiscal year, And that 7.5% is broken down into the following. Now, with that 7.5%, it's divided into two parts: a 4.5% non-pensionable cash allowance and a 3% pensionable wage increase, which the unions rejected. However, government has said that the requested 10% increase would cost the country 49 billion rand, which it simply does not have. The unions, which include the Congress of South African Trade Unions, the South African Federation of Trade Unions, as well as the Federation of Unions of South Africa, have said they would give government 7 days to respond with another offer, failing which they would escalate their action beginning on December the 2nd. Joining me now is Trevor Shaku. He's the spokesman for the South African Federation of Trade Unions, SAFTU, in South Africa. Trevor, welcome again to Business Edge. Thank you so much for joining me.
Good day. Thanks for having us.
So this wage dispute, partially in most regards, stems from the 2018 agreement that government also entered into with the unions. But we know there's also conversation around how COVID-19 and now Russia and the Ukraine crisis has also affected wages. But let's go back to the agreement that government signed in 2018. What has government failed to live up to that's also following them to this particular wage dispute now?
Two things. The first one is that in the agreement struck in 2018, which was a multi-year agreement spanning for 3 years, from 2018 to the financial year 2020-2021, government decided not to honor the last leg of that particular agreement, failing to give workers an increase. So workers, as a result, did not receive any increase in 2020-2021. The second transgression is that they first fired the first salvo against the undermining of the collective bargaining, which is a system which has been created through hard-won struggles in the country to ensure that workers are able to negotiate with their employers the conditions of employment. So as a government which was supposed, first and foremost, to set an example for the private sector to ensure that they respect the collective bargaining, they went on to actually attack and show disrespect for that particular process and system. So those are the first things which, in our view, were part and parcel of our grievances in relation to the 2018 agreement, which was struck, I think, around July 2018.
Okay, so government has said that this is their final offer at 7.5%, which is effectively what led to the National Day yesterday. And it says that increasing it beyond that, or giving that 7.5 already, is going to cost the fiscus some 34 billion rand. Why is this offer completely unacceptable to the unions?
The 7.5% is not an offer, actually. It's a fictitious round of what the Department of Public Service and Administration has actually done. They didn't offer us anything new in that. The only thing which was a new offer was the 3%. So the 7.5 is actually a deliberate and a mischievous concoction of government drive to try to, first and foremost, mislead the public service workers with the aim of politically demobilizing them from joining the mass actions which are being prepared in the country to resist the 3%. We, of course, have been trying to combat these lies in the country as a whole, but also within the trade unions, for members to understand that this is not a 7.5 offer. So let me break it down for you. So in 2021, workers negotiated, they were given 1.5% agreement, so 1.5% increase on the baseline, but also they were given what they called at the time, and they still call, a cash gratuity, which was non-pensionable but taxable. So when we went for the round of negotiations for 2022-2023 in April rather, they offered us a 3%. A 3%, which also, of course, came after robust debates in those particular chambers. So they offered a 3% and a continuation of that cash gratuity. But they mischievously smuggled the cash gratuity as part of the new offer. They're saying they're offering us a cash gratuity and the 3%, and that is not true because they are merely offering us 3%. The cash gratuity is merely a continuation of what they would have offered last year. So there is no 7.5%, and we are rejecting first the fallacious claims, but secondly the 3%, which is the real offer on the table.
So how do you respond to those that say that the demands of the unions are actually somewhat selfish demands, that at the end of it, they're asking for almost 33% of South Africa's total expenditure to go to maybe around 1-point-something million people? How do you respond to people who say that, and that this is the reason why government needs to stand firm on what is on the table?
First of all, it's not true. It is 33% of the expenditure in the public service. And government expenditure is a very huge package, and it is not only constituted by the public service. So the 33% merely relates to that section of government expenditure, which we call an expenditure in the public service. There are other forms of expenditure, such as expenditure in the state corporations and all of that. So let me come and deal with this. The first one is that we are not being selfish by demanding a 10% and also an expansion, a 10% wage increment, but also an expansion of the public service wage bill. The reason why we're demanding 10% is to offset the negative impact brought by the rising cost of living, which has seen inflation skyrocket, inflation of food, inflation in terms of fuel, but also inflation in terms of transport, because the costs, the input costs in terms of transport are offset into the prices of consumer commuter transport, which of course relates to buses, taxis, and that for workers and of course learners to be able to ride to school and to work on a daily basis. But also the rising cost of electricity and the increasing interest rates, which have skyrocketed in the country, and we're expecting another interest rate hike of 0.75% tomorrow. So these are the first reasons why we're demanding the 10% to offset the rising cost of living. The second reason we're demanding the expansion of the public service wage bill is so that government can be able to hire more workers. The reason why we're looking for government to hire, or we're demanding government to hire more workers, is because the number of headcount in the public service has dwindled, and the dwindling of that particular number of headcount in the public service has actually compromised the delivery of services. First, it has affected our workers because the workload has gone up, but secondly, we are experiencing a problem whereby the beneficiaries of public service itself are suffering because they have to stand for long queues in clinics and hospitals. They have to stand long queues in traffic offices where they must get these particular services. But if you look generally at the teacher to learner ratio, it's too high. In the country, you have a teacher to learner ratio of between 1:33, but this is just an exaggeration a generalization looking at the total number of employed teachers and number of enrolled learners in the system. If you go to different schools, you would find that there is overcrowding because there are lesser teachers in those particular schools. So you have that problem. So we are calling for the expansion of the public sector, which will not because we are selfish, but because we care of the delivery of services to our people.
Okay, Trevor, so I know yesterday that those who participated in the National Day handed the Minister of Employment, who himself is a former unionist or union man, a list of demands. Just very briefly take us through the major demands that the unions are making of the Employment Minister, therefore, of course, of the government as well.
Okay, so the first one is that we are demanding we're rejecting the 3% and demanding the 10%. The second demand is the one which I have already counted, is that the departments or the public service administration must ensure that it fills the vacant posts, because in addition to the fact that the total post establishment in the public service is not adequate, what public service administration in cahoots with Treasury has been doing is to not fill a certain number of posts on a yearly basis so that they can be able to save some money in that regard, because this is part of their projects to carry out budget cuts, to carry out budget cuts in the public service in particular. But also we are demanding that the money must be made available to ensure that we beat the infrastructure backlog, which is affecting our people at the current moment, which is affecting public service institutions at the current moment, leading in schools, for instance, understaffing, but hospitals at the current moment have pregnant women who are sleeping on the floor because there is not enough space for them. There is not enough equipment and bedding for them to be attended to, but also to be able to sit decently in. So there are a number of those particular issues which we've raised as part of demands, and I think I've counted equipment, because equipment is lacking in public institutions. So those are some of the key issues. For instance, schools do not even, many schools, more than 17,000, if not 15,000 of these schools, who I think were around 23,000 at the particular, I think 2019, 23,000, do not have libraries, do not have maths and natural science laboratories, do not have internet. In fact, schools have to adapt by buying data on a daily basis to be able to receive emails from departments and all that. This shows the dire impact in which the infrastructure and the equipment of our public institution is in. And we are calling on government to ensure that it closes that particular gap we're experiencing as far as that is concerned.
All right, Trevor, before I let you go, the unions gave government a 7-day ultimatum that if the government fails to meet the union's demand of a 10% wage increase, that you would be prepared to go on strike. I think for many people to understand how consequential and how also possibly damaging a strike from the unions involved as well as their affiliates would be, who are the public sector workers who would go on strike with you in 7 days? And are you ready to go through with that strike? How prepared are the unions to go on strike?
There are two processes which are underway at the current moment. The first one is that apart from the National Day of Action that took place yesterday, some unions are still in the process of balloting, but other unions, including our unions, which is NUPSO and SAFTU, have already finished balloting and have served the employer with the strike certificate. We have filed and finished the picketing rules, and we've entered in that particular process alongside PSA. So we are across various hospitals currently embarking in what we call lunchtime pickets, where during lunchtime our workers come out to ensure that they make such particular demonstrations. But as soon as other unions finish that particular process, and in the post-assessment meeting, which we're going to have as the three federations, we're going to determine how we go about that particular strike. At the press briefing last week, the leadership had hinted that we're going to have to consider going into an indefinite strike. That particular indefinite strike, I've repeated in quite a number of interviews that we might have an impediment at the current moment, which is the festive seasons which are approaching.
Yes.
But the discussions around when are we starting with that indefinite strike will definitely emerge out of the discussions we are going to have, but also in light also of the response we are going to have to get from the Department of Public Service and Administration and Treasury as to how far are they going with the demand we have put forward.
Okay.
And if they meet our demand, of course, there's no need of striking. But if they do not, we are going to make preparations for such a strike.
All right, Trevor, we'll be following the situation very closely. A lot can happen in the next 7 days, and many people would be hopeful that South Africa's government can avert yet another strike in 2022. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you very much.